episode 31 of the Bible Connection podcast. So, guys, this is a weekly podcast. It follows our church's Bible reading plan that we might encourage you to just keep on reading your Bibles this year. So, I'm your host, Josh Williams, and with me are a few of my good friends, Brandon Stooksbury.
Hey, how you doing?
John Steinke.
Hello.
And Taylor Babcock.
Hey there.
So, guys, this week we are discussing the Song of Solomon, aka Song of Songs, right? So, reading the Song of Solomon in church is pretty rare, and it isn't hard to see why. The first thing that happens is the young woman is talking about wanting to make out and how virgins love her guy. Well, why is this book of the Bible, clearly focusing on a sexual theme?
Well, the Bible talks a lot about sex, and sex is a gift from God. So I think people are pretty terrified to talk about sex in church to an unhealthy degree because of a lot of sometimes good reasons. First, like we've been called pretty clearly throughout the New Testament to keep ourselves from sexual immorality, from impurities, from speech that isn't upholding good or pure. And so so much about sex in our culture is so distorted and so twisted into unbiblical ways. And children are so onslaughted so often by sexual conversations that we're trying to guard them from, that we've kind of, kicked our own feet out from underneath us because of our terror. We want a place where we just don't have to deal with sex. And, that's a problem because the Bible deals with sex. The Bible uses sex as a theme to explore how we understand God in some contexts. I mean, from the beginning of the Bible in Genesis, we see that man was created with sex in mind. Male and female were created to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And unless you think that's too vague, it makes it pretty clear in Genesis 2, it's not good for Adam to be there without a woman because he can't fill that mandate. He needs a helper. He needs his own flesh. Jesus cites that as where marriage comes from. And so sex was never a consequence of the fall, a sinful, icky thing. Sex was a gift from God in order for us to fulfill his mandate in spreading his glory throughout creation. And the picture of sex has been corrupted throughout the history of the world after the fall. I mean, in Genesis chapter 9, we've got, Ham exposing the nakedness of his father. That confuses some people. Is that
Noah?
Noah.
Yeah.
That confuses some people. What's that talking about? He slept with his mom.
Yeah.
It was an inappropriate distortion of the marital union of Noah and his wife. He broke that good picture of sex to do something inappropriate, and it caused the child to be cursed, Canaan. And in case you think I'm taking that like wildly, where are you getting that from? Look at Leviticus chapter 18, verses 6 through 8. It uses that exact same language from the exact same author, and it makes it pretty clear that's what they mean by exposing the nakedness of your father. But I mean, continuing down, like Solomon, this is a Song of Solomon. Let's talk about Solomon for a second. When his fidelity in marriage and temptation towards sex corrupted him, the kingdom fell apart. And God compares Israel to the harlot, to the whore, to the prostitute in their idolatry. And so sex is a picture that God uses, and it's a gift that he uses for us to fill creation with his glory and for him to express the intimacy of covenant life and of marriage. And so the Song of Solomon is expressing passionate sexual intimacy as a good thing in a marriage between a young man and a young woman, because it is necessary if you want to keep a committed, faithful covenant of marriage. White hot, passionate intimacy between a man and a woman is an important thing, and that adjectives that I'm using, I think, are original to like what the author here is using in chapter 8. We might get there in a second. I'm not just using those adjectives to try to be crass, and I think even the fact that kind of feels like it's crass is one of the problems that I'm trying to talk about. I'm stealing this next part from Dr. Miles Van Pelt. I didn't come up with it my own, but he says he thinks one of the reasons why this is such an uncomfortable topic is because our culture wants all of the sexual passion with none of the covenantal faithfulness. No rules, no law of God.
Did you say wins or once?
Once.
Okay, sorry.
Our culture wants all of the sexual gratification with none of the covenantal restrictions, none of the faithfulness restrictions, none of the rules from God. And our church wants all of the covenant faithfulness, and it doesn't want to talk about sex at all.
Yep.
And the healthy thing to do is to recognize that sex in the context of marriage is a beautiful thing, and men and women that are married should be encouraged to do it often, and to do it joyfully. But I mean sex.
Yep. I think we got that one.
Yeah, context clues.
All right. So if the theme of the Song of Solomon is the marriage covenant and the importance of sexual intimacy, what wisdom should we take from this text about these two themes? Not everybody wants.
I am not going to have this podcast only be me. You guys have been married longer than me. You have
You're
kids.
the
Come
expert. Well, church history is replete with lots and lots of ways not to think about sex. I mean, you
Replete. Hold on. Replete. I graduated from Powell. I need help.
So their church history has lots and lots of examples
Thank you.
of how to not think about biblical sexuality. So you have through forming fairly early within the Roman Catholic Church. If you would have said that to the people in the 4th century, they would have looked at you like, "What are you talking about? What is Roman Catholicism?" That wouldn't have made any sense to them. But early on, their celibacy and the worldview of the culture in that day was kind of what we would call Gnostic, and it viewed sex as something necessary for mankind to continue, but it is not good. So much so that the apex of humanity is to be celibate, and that's the reason you see in the Roman Catholic Church, even to this day, that priests have to be celibate, and you don't have to do a lot of searching on the internet or the news or whatever to see that is not going well. It is causing perverse. When God said it is not good for man to be alone, and when you put many men that are alone, and it is just not good. And not only, it's not just the Roman Catholic Church that has these problems of a skewed view of sexuality. You find it throughout church history. There's you find that the church has fallen off the into one ditch or the other, whether it's an over sexualized perspective or under a withholding of that, and it's a lot of it has to do with the embarrassment that people have with texts like this. You just don't hear these. You don't hear this spoken about a lot, and this book is not the only place in the scriptures that talk about sex. You see it throughout, and you see that sex, along with all of God's gifts, food, drink, pleasure, whatever, can be a blessing, and it can also be a curse, right? So, however, we all of God's gifts are to be accepted within the covenant, right? Within covenant life and covenant fidelity. That's kind of redundant, but but we see that there is wisdom from not only the Song of Solomon, but throughout the scriptures that we are to be wise with this gift that God has given us, and how does that manifest in this book, specifically in the marriage relationship. And we talked a little bit before about this, but I think we need to be careful that we don't define Christianity from a 1950s perspective. Leave it to Beaver, that this is how men, in certain TV shows, that the man, it was so risque to show a man and a wife sleeping together in the same bed, that you had television shows that showed that had the husband sleeping in one bed and the wife sleeping in another. and that's just wrong. You know what I'm saying?
Quite ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just wrong, and we should look at that. That, of course, it's entertainment, right? But we should look at that as just as wicked as an over sexualization. Right. You know what I'm saying? So we have to be balanced in what the scriptures talk about. We as the church and especially in Christian homes and families, we should model what a healthy sexuality looks like, and we should. And I've talked a lot, but I've not referenced a whole lot of the text here. But our children need to see what a healthy sexual ethic looks like from parents. They need to not only hear about it, they need to see it. They need to see that daddy loves mommy, and daddy's pretty freaking attracted to mommy. And that, and also the way the book of Song of Solomon talks, it can seem, that when the writer here is talking about the man and that his teeth are like wool, right, and his legs are like alabaster columns that go down to golden pedestals, right? If you were to say that to your wife, or the wife was to say that to her husband, they would be like, okay, that's great. But in the day in which this was written, this was a creative way of loving your loving your future spouse, and be like, I'm thinking about you, right? You are on my mind, and I am thinking of creative ways to love you and to express my affection towards you. And we need to do that today. And I'm saying this because I struggle with it so much. I personally, this is a downfall of mine, but I personally need to take this book more into myself and learn how to express these things to Allison, right? And let her know, right? You are the apple of my eye. You know what I'm saying? You are what I desire the most. So anyway, I've talked a lot. But.
Kids are growing up in a world where they are being taught information primarily from our culture through media, through the internet, what's on TV, through their friends, their peers. And I would say that it is few, not often, that the church addresses sex and what that looks like within a marriage, and how the Bible speaks to that. The Song of Solomon is not a book that I remember very often going through up as a kid, and it wasn't really taught. So let's just think about, as a generation of kids, if you're not taught what God says about sex and marriage, you're going to learn it from somewhere else. And as the church, when we leave a topic as important as this to not be taught by the church, but rather taught by people who are very worldly, or from media, wherever that's consumed, they're going to have a very distorted view of sex and what that looks like within a marriage, and what is a healthy perspective and view, and how is that lived out. So I think it is absolutely the church's responsibility to teach the Song of Solomon and the rest of Scripture, where it talks about how a husband is to love his wife, and how a wife in return loves her husband within marriage, and communicating what that example looks like, because kids model what their parents do. And if their parents aren't living that out, they're not going to know what a biblical, healthy relationship is to be. So I think from number one, a parent's perspective, we need to read God's word, read passages such as what's written in the Song of Solomon, understand what it says, and be able to, as the husband or as the wife, be able to express a healthy love relationship with your spouse in a way that communicates that you love them, but respectfully lives within the confines of how God designed it. Because if we don't, your children are never going to see how that is to be lived, how that is to be carried out, and then they're going to have a perverted worldview of what sex and marriage is, as the rest of the world does. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, well, what you're saying, absolutely, and I want to piggyback on what you just said. As when you have children, and whoever's listening to this, if you have children that are growing up and finding kind of who they are, kids are. You will hear this phrase. You'll hear about that. Kids are literally sponges. I mean, your kids will start talking like you. They will walk like you. They will make decisions. I mean, they are absorbing things from you. Hopefully, sometimes it's not the best of things. They are absorbing things from you as parents that they don't even know. I mean, they are just observing and a lot of times mimicking, and they may not even be trying to do it. That's just the category in which they have always known. All right, so shepherding children is very important. But something else that we talked about before we hit record is something I was completely blind to it. A friend of mine, Andy Tillery, he showed me something in this book that I had never seen before, and over you'll see multiple times the wisdom of the Song of Solomon will say, "Don't awaken love before it's time," and he was explaining to me that with his children, he does not. And after I heard him say this, it made so much sense to me, and I've tried with everything in me to take this wisdom on. And our children, they are sponges, right? They're absorbing from us. They're absorbing things from those around them, and it is very important to guard our children, guard them in such a way that, for instance, if you have a 7-year-old boy or girl, your parents or whoever doesn't need to be asking that little boy, "Hey, how many girlfriends do you have?" Or who's your girlfriend now? And if you got a little girl, who's your boyfriend?
Yeah, you think she's cute over there? Go talk to her.
That is lighting a fire that they have no category or no. And if this makes some people mad, I'm willing to argue about it. I mean, I feel very strongly about this.
I'd say Solomon feels very strongly about it.
Yeah. But these, you are lighting a uncontrollable fire in the middle of
Forest fire.
You're lighting a forest fire in the middle of the living room.
Yep.
There is no category to contain that, and there are consequences for that it may seem innocent, but it is. We as the church need to do better at this, and and be careful that we heed Solomon's wisdom here to not awaken love before it's time.
And you're referencing 8 verse 4, right?
It's multiple.
It's repeated, and there's a reason why don't awaken love before it pleases. It is repeated. For one, and John, I'll let him answer that here in a minute. But we see that repeated throughout the text because there is strong emphasis in it. And the question, so a 7-year-old, I don't know that anybody really takes a boyfriend-girlfriend serious at that age. But like Brandon was just mentioning, don't encourage them to do that, because really the heart of the issue is, let's go into the boyfriend-girlfriend question. And at what age is it appropriate to have a boyfriend or girlfriend? Well, I'm not going to put an age on it, but I will say, what is the intention? What is the intentionality of having a boyfriend or girlfriend? And if your answer is anything other than to pursue marriage and to find a spouse, a godly husband or a godly wife, then there is no reason whatsoever for you to be dating. So if you are not at an age or a period in your life where you can pursue someone in order to get married, let's say you're in high school or middle school or just whatever, and you date someone, but because you are living at your mom and dad's house without a job, attending school, you are not at an age where you can become married. So I would say that there's no reason or intentionality for you to pursue that. Now, once again, I'm not putting an age on that, but I think the wisdom from the literature that we read, don't awaken love before it pleases. Don't pursue a relationship with the opposite sex before you're ready to be engaged in a marital relationship. So I think that applies when we talk about high school and middle school. I don't think there's any reason to do that unless you are ready. Now, I do know people from the 1950s that were married at 16, 17 years old. Okay, but realistically today, I don't know of anybody getting married at 16, 17, or really even 18 years old, and that's rare if it is. Whatever time period in your life you are ready to pursue that relationship, I think that is when. But don't get into a situation where you are awakening love. And basically, biologically, we are programmed to want to have sex. And therefore, if you're in a relationship with someone where you have to draw that line because you're not married, you're putting yourself into a situation where you're going to get burned. So it's the wisdom of that is don't put yourself into a situation where you're going to get burned from having that relationship into a position where you're not able to pursue it any further.
And also don't buy into the lie that, like, if you are keeping your kids from those situations, that makes you some kind of abusive or controlling parent. Now, there are obviously people that are way too controlling and take things too far. But when you talk about that phrase, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, that you not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. This is repeated throughout the text as kind of the structure of the poems that were given. So Song of Solomon is wisdom literature. It's poetic. We can tell it's poetic from those, teeth like wool that Brandon was describing earlier. And when we've been reading the wisdom literature, we've seen this trend where the wisdom is kind of unraveled and given to us at the end of each text. We've seen in Job at the very end, God speaks up and he answers what's been going on. And we've seen in Ecclesiastes at the conclusion that the assembler, the preacher, he gives an account of at the end of it all, what's the end? It's to fear God and keep his commandments. Well, here in chapter 8, we see that these themes that we're talking about of sexuality and marriage, what is the right wisdom and perspective for them? And when you come to that final, in verse 4, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, not to awaken or stir up love until it pleases. Down in verse 6, they talk about it in strong pictorial words that show covenant and marriage. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as fierce as the grave. It flashes a flash of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. And then we're talking about, okay, so we need to be keeping our children from awakening love before it's the right time. This is kind of an uncomfortable verse, but if you read verse 8 of chapter 8, we have a little sister, and she has no breasts. So she's a little girl. And what shall we do for her until the day she's spoken for? If she's a wall, we'll build on her a battlement of silver. So if she's already safe from these predations of sexual activity, we're going to build her up in beauty, but keep her secure from it. But if she's a door, we're going to enclose it with boards of cedar. We're going to board that door up and keep her from those situations. And so the lovers in the poem, they're celebrating. Verse 10, I was a wall, says the woman. My breasts were towers. I was in his eyes, and I found shalom. She's saying how grateful she is that she herself was kept until this beauty of marriage, so that all of the desires to make out and all of her eyes flashing at how beautiful and sexy this guy seems to be in her eyes, she's now about to, in a healthy expression of marriage, enjoy all of those benefits. And she's thankful for the warnings that she's been given throughout the songs to guard that, to keep it safe. And so as we look at the wisdom from this book, we should understand that sex is a good thing, that sex is a thing that is going to be able to fuel the passion that allows for the covenant keeping of marriage, that it keeps you from temptations, that it keeps you from despising your marriage, and it holds you fast to it because that love, that passion fuels your desire to be faithful to your spouse. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're protecting children, young women. I think this text is written to young women like Proverbs was written to the young man, but just like women should learn from Proverbs, young men have a lot to learn from this text. We should be protecting these young women in a way that they understand they should be reading this text. This woman who wasn't married, she had a clear understanding of what healthy sexuality looked like as she looked at her future husband, but protect them, keep them from the situations that's going to cause it. So a specific question that we asked earlier, like how do we model that as parents? Well, how about when, Dad, you're watching TV, don't talk about how hot you think the actress is on the TV. Talk about how beautiful you think your wife is in front of your daughter. When your daughter is wondering what marriage should look like, she's going to think about what she saw in her home. Hold her hand. Take her on a date. Compliment her outfit. Show her respect. Do your kids see a grumbling father who sticks his feet up and barks for another beer? Or do they see the father who goes out of their way to serve and care for their wife? Do the young men see a mother who's always nagging and being hateful and condescending to their husband? Or do they see a wife that wants to constantly please and make their husband smile and look twice because they're dressing up for their husband? You need to be modeling a healthy perspective of relationships for your kids because they're going to be dealing with the consequences of what they observe from you as they grow up.
Absolutely. And all of this is not a one-time conversation. I think and just from conversations I've been in, like all of this is so foreign and awkward for a lot of families that they either never talk about it, or by the time they talk about it, it's like way past due. The kids are in high school and you know what, Mom, Dad, I've already figured all of that out.
The love has been awoken in their heart way before it was time.
Yeah, so if you wait, like this needs to be taught age appropriately from when they're little to they can conceptually see Mom and Dad love each other and all of that, and not just have a conversation, but like John said, it needs to be lived out by their actions in the home.
My mom keeps going back to that Proverbs that you extrapolated on carrying fire close to your chest.
Yeah, the young man, like, why would you look after the cheap prostitute? Like, why would you carry fire so close to your chest and not expect to get burned? Don't play with fire.
So let me. I know we're about to close, but I do need to say this. This is a kind of me being honest, right? Because this is what I'm. This podcast is for. I hope that nobody listens to this podcast and think, well, there's four guys that really have it figured out. Let me speak from experience for a second. All of these things that you could have screwed up here, that I've done that, right? I've been the person growing up. I did not respect women. I was a user and an abuser, right? And even when early into my Christian life, I was not being consistent. Even into my Christian life, I was not being consistent with the principles that are laid out from that we see in here. But I'll never forget a conversation that I had with Bert Solomon, and he told me, and it is burned into my mind. I will never forget it. I remember where we were sitting. I remember what he was wearing. I remember the tone of voice that he told me because he saw the inconsistency in my life. And he said, Brandon, those girls may not be your princess, but they are somebody's right now. They will be. They are. Those ladies is their father's princess, or they will be a princess to a man in the future. So you need to treat that as that young lady in that way, right? So as we I've never forgotten that, and I try to. Bert was a great role model for me, and I am eternally grateful for his wisdom in that. And just know, right? I've screwed all this up in the past, and I'm learning from these things too, and trying to raise my family in a different way, right? So.
Closing us out, the original Hebrew title translates roughly to the Song of All Songs, right? Kind of how we could read the King of Kings. It is called the Song of Songs. So why is a book on marriage considered that important in the Bible? And what is the biblical concept of marriage?
We're running low on time, so I think I'm just going to read from a definition that I wrote down, just, save a little bit of time. Marriage is a covenant, an exclusive, permanent, one flesh relationship between one man and one woman, instituted and enacted by the creator of the heaven and earth. And marriage is so significant to the Bible because it's a picture that God has given us to understand our relationship with Christ. Marriage
church is the bridegroom, right?
Marriage bookends the whole Bible. Genesis 2, we have the institution of marriage. Revelation 21 and 22, we're going to see the wedding supper of Christ. And in Ephesians 5, Paul makes it clear that marriage is a mystery that shows Christ's love for his church and the church's submissive love for Christ. And so, this isn't just a book that's, okay, it's on a theme that maybe I'll approach one day, maybe I'll read a book about it. You should be having consistent talks in your home and making efforts to guard your marriage and to keep it in the biblical mindset, because it is hugely significant to the Christian life.
All right, I believe that's it for this week's episode of the Bible Connection podcast. So I just want to say thank you so much for tuning in and enjoying this this scripture with us this week. So we just hope that this podcast equips and encourages you as you read. So if you would like, leave a comment on YouTube if you have any questions, or you can send us a question to our email on screen. I just hope you guys have a blessed day, and we'll be back with you on episode 32.